Hello, friends. I didn't plan on this being my third video, but I just came across this episode of Piers Morgan Uncensored,
Give me one piece of evidence that proves that Jesus was a vegetarian.
where he interviews a couple of guys who made a documentary called Christspiracy, a film made by the same vegan animal rights activists behind Cowspiracy and Seaspiracy. Now, Cowspiracy attacks the beef industry, and Seaspiracy attacks the seafood industry, and now Christspiracy, it attacks, well, you. Now, mind you, I haven't seen any of these films, and I'm simply commenting on this interview alone. A quick web search, however, does turn up that the big reveal here in Christspiracy is that Jesus was impaled for publicly speaking out against killing animals, and that this has been covered up for the last 2,000 years until these two guys came along. Well, sounds like fun, right? Let's watch them explain, and we will fact-check them as we go.
Well, Kip Anderson and Cameron Waters are filmmakers whose hit documentaries have brought the apparent horrors of eating meat and fish to millions of viewers around the world. Now, Cowspiracy took aim at the farming industry. Seaspiracy was, well, you guessed it, all about fish. Now Kip and his team are back with a provocative, to say the least, new movie which threatens to blow the lid off veganism and religion.
Blow the lid off.
Is there any threat or danger making a film like this?
Yeah,
No.
You just wait and see.
Okay.
You just wait and see. They will stop at nothing to keep
Who?
this truth from getting known.
Who's that?
Is there a spiritual way to kill an animal?
So this is a good place to start. Is there a spiritual way to kill an animal? Well, apparently there was, considering how animal sacrifice was an integral part of worship of God back in ancient Israel. In fact, when Solomon built the first temple in Jerusalem, notice how they dedicated this temple to God. It reads here, King Solomon offered the sacrifice of 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep. Thus, the king and all the people inaugurated the house of the true God. So this was a spiritual occasion, and animal sacrifices was part of this spiritual occasion. But I have a feeling these guys are just getting started, so let's continue.
But your pretext is that Jesus was a vegetarian and might have been crucified because of his vegetarianism. I mean, on what possible planet do you base that on?
Yeah.
The film doesn't say that he was crucified to be in vegetarianism, but there is a massive thing in the film that happened 4 days before he got crucified, which is a cleansing of the temple that's historically documented. And the film explores what happened at that and what were the intentions of not only Jesus, but the Nazarene movement at that time, and giving it complete context.
Nazarene movement?
It's been mistranslated, and it's a
was no
powerful,
Nazarene
powerful
movement.
reveal that will really transform Christianity. And they say this is massively, massively groundbreaking, and it's going to really be a new chapter for Christianity.
Okay,
2,000
here's what I don't
years
get.
later,
I've done a
and
bit of
now we
research
get a new
myself
chapter.
with my team.
Okay.
This is, you may call it biblical scholarship, I guess. Luke 24, 41 to 43. Jesus ate fish. Jesus also served fish to his followers. Matthew 14, and he caused the fishermen's nets to be filled on two different occasions, Luke 5 and John 21. The purpose of catching the fish was to sell them so they could be eaten. Jesus also cooked fish for his disciples, John 21:9. So he clearly ate a lot of fish.
And you know what? Pierce is actually spot on right here. And I think we should actually take some time to look at some of these references and see them in their context. And we'll take one for now. I'm going to save the best one for the end of this video. But let's take a look at this reference he mentioned in John chapter 21. Here's what it has to say, and I don't see how this can really mean anything else than what it says. But it says, After this, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. Then Jesus said to them, Children, do you not have anything to eat, do you? They answered, No. He said to them, Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they came ashore, they saw there a charcoal fire with fish lying on it and bread. Jesus said to them, Bring some of the fish you just now caught. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and the same with the fish. So That's pretty clear, wouldn't you agree? So I'm really curious to see what these two have to say about that.
But what I will say is when you look deep enough into some of those stories, which we do in this film, and I highly encourage you to see it, these fish stories start to become quite a bit fishy and certainly raise a lot of questions, namely that the word translated as fish is 3 different Greek words, 2 of which just simply mean to relish something just eaten on bread.
Okay, so let's stop there. That's a good point to talk about. Yes, one of the words translated as fish did originally mean relish in classical Greek. But by Jesus' day, the language had changed. The people were speaking what we now call Koine Greek, or what we know as Biblical Greek. The lesson here is that languages change over time. For example, in English, the word awful used to mean full of awe, impressive, worthy of respect. But today it means something not very good at all. The word dumb used to refer to someone who was unable to speak, but today it usually has the same meaning as stupid. Unbelievable used to mean unable to believe, but today it usually means something very good or impressive. To be gay was to be happy and carefree, but today that refers to one's sexual preference. The same thing happened to the classical Greek word for relish. The concoction that this word referred to was a relish traditionally made with fish and spread over bread. And so in time, the word came to simply mean fish by Jesus' day. Now, imagine you are a translator, and let's take a look at this word, relish, in context, okay? So, we have John 21:9 says, "When they came ashore, they saw there a charcoal fire with fish lying on it and bread." Now, the word here for fish is opsarion in classical Greek, and this could be translated as relish, but the same word is actually used in the very next verse. So think about the context. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish, osparion, you just now caught." Obviously, friends, they were not out at sea catching relish off the side of the boat, were they? Let's move on.
And in Jesus' own retelling of the feeding of the 5,000 with the fish, he himself in Matthew 16 verse 9 says, "Don't you remember when I multiplied the loaves?" and doesn't mention the fish at all. And that's Jesus' own word.
Okay, so we need to stop here and talk about this because these two individuals are neglecting what the context is about right here. In Matthew chapter 16:9, we read, "Now the disciples crossed to the other side and forgot to take bread along. Jesus said to them, 'Keep your eyes open and watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees.'" So here's the context. Jesus is using leaven, the stuff that makes bread rise, as an object lesson. That scripture continues, "So they began to reason among themselves, saying, 'We did not take any loaves along.'" Well, why don't the disciples refer to fish here? Because there's no leaven in fish, and Jesus didn't mention the fish. Well, knowing this, Jesus said, "Why are you discussing among yourselves that you have no loaves, you with little faith? Did you not yet see the point? Or do you not remember the 5 loaves in the case of the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? Or the 7 loaves in the case of the 4,000 and how many large baskets you took up?" So why doesn't Jesus refer to fish right here? Well, why would he? The fish have nothing to do with his object lesson, which he clarifies for his disciples in the next verse. "How is it that you do not discern that I did not speak to you about bread, but watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees?" Then they grasped what he said, to watch out, not for the leaven of bread, but for the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So there you go. There's the lesson. Mentioning fish anywhere here would have only distracted or detracted from the point that Jesus was trying to make. So, okay? What next?
At minimum, we're not saying anything. We're just asking questions. Why is there this discrepancy?
Well, you are
there
saying
is no
he was
discrepancy.
a vegetarian.
Jesus
but
knew
you've
what he
got
was
no
saying.
actual evidence that he didn't eat fish, have you? In fact, all the evidence in the Bible points to the opposite.
That's true. It points to the opposite.
Well, even, Piers, before even going into that, that's only really scratching the surface of what this film actually is, as Kip was saying. This film has a deeply historical context. What we go into is that
Well, only
the
if it's
original domestication...
It doesn't have any historical context
Well,
if it's
the
a load of old baloney, does it? I mean, you go on to talk about meat, for example.
Oh, no.
I mean, Jesus attended Passover in John 2:13, John 5:1, and Matthew 26:17-30. Jesus would have been in disobedience of the law if he'd not eaten the Passover meal, which included meat.
That's true.
So the truth is, he not only
Right,
ate
well,
fish,
Piers,
he ate meat.
Yeah, Piers, I've read the Bible front to back myself. I've obsessed over this for the last 10 years, and my entire life was based on Scripture. And I wear WWJD on my wrist. I ask what would
there you go.
Jesus
He's
do
got a
about every
bracelet.
moral and ethical dilemma, and this was just a carry on from my natural inclination in my life to understand what Jesus would do about certain scenarios and certain situations. And what I can say is that the Passover meal, if you read in the Scripture, it says nothing about him eating a lamb. It's not mentioned in the Scripture. And in fact, what it does say is that he went
It was
to
tradition.
join everyone for his Last Supper. And Piers, what was served at the Last Supper? Do you remember?
Well, why don't you tell me what you think was served? Veggie burgers?
Well, it says in the Scripture, bread, bread in the juice of grapes, bread.
Okay, so we got to stop here and correct these guys real quick. So this is good. The juice of grapes, by the way, is actual wine. So Piers is spot on about Jesus eating the Passover lamb. And before Jesus passed the bread and the wine, they actually celebrated the Passover according to Jewish law. By law, they had to have unleavened bread, a slaughtered lamb with no broken bones, and bitter greens. This was because on the night of the very first Passover, they were instructed to slaughter a lamb and spread its blood on their doorposts so that the angel would pass over their homes as it went through the land, killing the firstborn in the land of Egypt. This was the final plague that causes Pharaoh to let Moses and the Israelites go free. So, every year since then, for 1,500 years, mind you, they would celebrate their freedom from Egypt by preparing the same meal they prepared on the night they were passed over and released. Simply put, there was no such thing as a vegan among the Israelites back then.
And so that was, in its own way, a very interesting telling. Again, it raises a lot of questions. Why is the Passover originally called the
Well, you think
Feast of
Jesus only
Unleavened
lived off bread?
Oh, why? Okay. So he said, why is the Passover originally called the Feast of Unleavened Bread? And simply put, this isn't true. The Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Passover are actually two different things. The Passover was on Nisan 14th, and this was immediately followed by the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which was a 7-day festival that started on Nisan 15 and ended on Nisan 21. The Passover came first, and this festival or feast was added later.
Well, Jesus said man does not live on bread alone.
Right, so he clearly didn't. He lived off bread, fish, meat, vegetables, fruit, like everybody else, which has been historically proven to be correct. That he was anything but a fish and meat loving normal eater. You guys want him because of your history. You guys want him to be a vegetarian so badly. You're now prepared to twist the actual Bible to do that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's going on here. He's dead on. These filmmakers, they have an agenda, and they are twisting Scripture in order to push that agenda.
I mean, you're the ones in denial. You want this to suit your narrative that we should all be vegans and vegetarians, and yet by trying to pull Jesus Christ into this and twisting the actual words of Scripture from the Bible, I think you're doing yourselves a disservice.
Where have we twisted the words of Scripture? Can you provide an example?
I've literally read
so
passages
far
where it's quite clear he ate fish and meat.
Well, no, so you mentioned Luke, right? Well, how come in multiple translations of that Luke verse that you mentioned, it says he ate honeycomb and fish? The honeycomb is omitted multiple times throughout all there's so many translations where that's omitted. Why is that omitted?
Okay. All right, so we have to address this. Why was the word honeycomb omitted? All right, well, this is because that the oldest and most reliable ancient Greek manuscripts that we have today, that you can go look at in museums that have been dated, scientifically, the oldest manuscripts do not include the word honeycomb at all in that verse. Only centuries later do manuscripts start showing up, manuscripts dating from about 400 AD or CE onwards. Then they start inserting the word honeycomb. So it's not that the word was omitted, it's actually that the word has been added hundreds of years later.
Also, the early church fathers that quote that verse, they don't mention the fish. There's many of the early church fathers that don't mention that he had fish. And in fact,
early church fathers
word
omit
that's
it.
used
Who
for
cares?
fish there,
Give me one piece of
prosphagion,
evidence
is,
that he was.
again,
Give me one piece of it. You say it's an historically important film. Give me one piece of evidence that proves that Jesus was a vegetarian.
Well, again, we're not here to prove that Jesus is a
I know
vegetarian.
what
We're here
Okay.
to raise really important
What's the
questions.
point of this
about
interview?
it.
That suggests
What's that?
give me one fact that establishes he was a vegetarian.
Well, here's something that suggests something worth considering, which is that Jesus' own brother, James the Just, that everyone knows, in multiple historical documents, in the first paragraph that describes him, it describes that he never ate flesh from the time of his birth.
Okay, all right, stop. We got to stop there. Okay, he's referring to the writings of Eusebius, who became bishop of Caesarea 250 years after James had died. And quite frankly, Eusebius is wrong. James was a Jew, and all Jews were required by law to eat the Passover lamb. And quite frankly, Eusebius is wrong on multiple accounts here. So, according to Eusebius, James was holy from his mother's womb, but the Bible teaches that we are all born sinners. James drank no wine or no strong drink, and yet Jesus served real wine at the Last Supper and commanded that real wine be used every year when the Last Supper was observed. According to Eusebius, James did not eat flesh, but we've already mentioned that he was a Jew and would have ate the Passover lamb. According to Eusebius, no razor ever came upon James' head. And this is false, because Christian men in the first century were admonished to keep their hair short. And then he finally says that James did not anoint himself with oil, and James specifically writes about greasing individuals with oil, and that James did not bathe, which is also incorrect, because all Christians, as well as the ancient Israelites before them, were actually ordered to keep themselves clean. So bathing was very important. Bathing was an integral part of worship as well. So Eusebius either did not know what he was talking about at all, or Eusebius also had an agenda, kind of like these guys here.
He never ate flesh.
So
this
his
is Jesus'
brother,
own brother.
So just to be clear,
Mar-
his brother was a vegetarian, you're saying, so that means Jesus was.
Who took on the movement after Jesus got crucified, who carried on the same movement that Jesus was part of? He carried it on.
Actually, no, that wasn't the case. It wasn't James. It wasn't Jesus' brother James who carried on the movement after Jesus died. In fact, James wasn't even a believer when Jesus died. He only became a believer afterwards. The movement was carried on by his 11 faithful apostles.
Well, it's not just James either. The forerunner of the movement, John the Baptist, was known in multiple historical sources to eat only plant-based foods.
What's that got to
And he
do with
also,
Jesus?
more
You're just
importantly,
naming
this-
other people.
It's not true.
Well, because Jesus carried on the movement of John the Baptist. John the Baptist was out in the wilderness giving a replacement.
Where
for
is a
animal
single
sacrifice
quote
through
from Jesus
through ritual
that
cleansing.
suggests he was a practicing vegetarian? You don't have one.
Yeah, and that's true. Real quick here. John the Baptist was also a Jew and ate the Passover lamb. And then Mark chapter 1, verse 6 says that, let me look it up here. Now, John wore clothing of camel's hair, not vegan, and a leather belt around his waist, also not vegan. And he ate locusts, still not vegan, and wild honey. Well, I'm not even sure what vegans actually think of wild honey. What do vegans think of wild honey? Let me know.
I just asked you to give me one bit of evidence which proves he was a vegetarian. You couldn't give me one.
That's true.
Well, I'll say this. In the movie, we bring up the Gospel of the Ebionites, which scholars, there's a consensus that this was an original document, the original Hebrew document of the Gospel of Matthew that the Ebionite tribe used, the Ebionite movement. And these are the people that followed James the Just, Jesus' brother. And they have an original statement from Jesus that says, I do not want to eat this Passover lamb with you. This is a document that we don't have anymore. Again, you're Piers Uncensored.
It's a document we don't have anymore.
Suggest, and many scholars suggest,
how do you quote a document that we don't have anymore?
Was censored a long time ago,
Wow.
2,000 years ago.
Conspiracy.
To be exact. So we've lost this.
So there's been a global,
exactly.
there's been a
Christspiracy,
global
that's the name of the
historical
film.
2,000-year conspiracy to prevent your version of events being proven. It's terrible.
Yeah, okay, and with that, I'm done. But I did say I was going to leave the best reference that Piers gave for last. And this is in Luke 24, verse 41 through 43. And it says, "But while they were still not believing for sheer joy and amazement, he said to them, 'Do you have something here to eat?' So they handed him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it right before their eyes." And by the way, the Greek word here for fish in this verse is ichthus, which only ever means fish. Never means relish or anything else, simply fish, which Jesus apparently found pretty tasty even after his resurrection. And that's about enough of this. There's actually another 8 minutes left in this Piers Morgan Uncensored video that if you have the stomach to watch the whole thing, I'll provide a link to it in the show notes below. But in summary, the vegans try the "can you picture Jesus killing an animal" approach, which is irrelevant. How many of us actually kill our own animals? There were meat markets back then and people designated to do that kind of work, just like there is in modern times. And then Piers asks them if they eat avocados and almonds, because he loves to bring up the point that the cross-pollination of these fruits requires transporting and relocating bee colonies, which results in mass catastrophic bee deaths. The vegans then bring up factory-farmed meat, which isn't entirely without merit, and in the end, they agree to disagree, sorta. Now, I have nothing against vegans. I have vegan friends, and some of them could probably benefit from having meat in their diet, but at the same time, some of them are doing just fine. At least they seem to be. And I can certainly admire those whose compassion for animals makes their choice a moral one. I can really understand their viewpoint. I also know it's not for me. I've found what works for me, and that's a carnivore-centric diet consisting of single-ingredient whole foods, whether that's strict carnivore, a meat-based low-carbohydrate keto, or an animal-based diet that allows for some more flexibility with certain select fruitages. Now, if you are struggling with weight or chronic issues, I truly believe that you would benefit from a carnivore or carnivore-centered diet, and we can help you with any questions you may have over on carnivoretalk.com. And if you've had success with the carnivore diet, or even a carnivore-ish diet, please reach out to me in the show notes below so we can enjoy some carnivore talk with one another. My name is Bob, and I'll see you soon.